Hey, Future Lawyer. Welcome to the LSAT Simplified podcast presented by Hey Future Lawyer, where we talk about all things LSAT, law school admissions, and otherwise. If you want to check out our free LSAT course, go to heyfuturelawyer.com to sign up for a free account today. All right, cool. So today we're going to talk about the different ways of teaching LSAT and why we like to teach LSAT via reading. Many LSAT prep options focus on the logic, which I find to be a fundamental misunderstanding of what the test is actually focusing on. I am a big believer that the LSAT is a reading test ultimately, and that the logic behind it is pretty simple. There's actually a free formal logic textbook, and I was showing this to the people in class where you can see what formal logic actually looks like. And what you'll find is that the logic on the LSAT is literally the first like 30, 40 pages of what that textbook has. And then everything beyond that is so complicated and it will never appear on the LSAT ever because that's not what the LSAT is testing. The LSAT is really basic in terms of what it is focusing on in terms of logic. It is not basic in terms of the words. They love to give you really dense sentence construction, weird vocab words. They will throw a like one word in, like they use the word feature as a verb in one answer choice and then as a noun in another. And often people don't catch that because they're not reading as carefully as they should be. But that slight difference makes all the difference in terms of the answers. So you really want to catch those little things. And the way you do that is by being a close reader, not by memorizing ways to diagram. If the fox is red, it will eat the hen. Like you could diagram that. Also, it's not actually what makes you better at the test. So it's why I think that studying on the LSAT should largely be focusing on the reading. The other thing, and I don't mean to sound cynical when I say this, but I think some other LSAT prep thinks, well, I don't think people like to be told that they're not good at reading. I don't think that's a fun thing to like wrestle with and be like, oh, my reading abilities are not quite as good as they could be. Because like, who wants to admit that like you can't read? Like that's what you say to people that are like, I don't know, that's like something you would say to a friend. Like actually, not to go into a personal story, but when I was a senior in high school, we had a friend, and one day we jokingly said that he couldn't read because he doesn't. He's not a dumb friend. He's actually a pretty smart guy, but he got like he had a big reaction to it. Like he did not like being said that he could not read. So next thing you know, that becomes a thing because like once you react to it, it gets stuck around. So, anyways, the whole point of this is that the LSAT is a very difficult reading test. It's not a difficult logic test, but when you tell people the logic is easy, people actually have a pretty adverse reaction to that. Because if I tell someone like, oh, that is actually a pretty straightforward idea, it doesn't feel good. Because like, who likes to be told that they missed something pretty obvious? Like, no one likes to be told like you missed something obvious. The thing is, it's not obvious because they've hidden it behind these dense languages, but people focus on the wrong part, which is the logic of it. It's also why I really dislike question types. I say this about most of the LSAT things that I kind of rail against is it's not that they're not real, it's that the emphasis shouldn't be placed there. It's like if you're going to run a marathon and all of your prep was centered around what shoes you wear. Like, yes, the shoes you wear kind of matter. It will help, I guess. Also, you should probably do your training runs because that's what actually is going to make a difference. And you could have the best shoes in the world. If you don't actually run, it's not going to matter what shoes you have. You're still going to be, pretty gassed by mile 3, let alone mile 26. So that's one reason why I think that you all should focus on the reading. The other thing is it will serve you. The better you get at reading, the better you get at, I think, being just a academic person and a person in the modern world. I also struggled at reading when I first sat down for the LSAT. I definitely worked on my reading. I had stopped reading after probably like middle school. I used to read for pleasure as a kid and I stopped. I think a lot of us do outside of like the books we get assigned in school. Part of it is also, I think many of the books we get assigned kind of suck in school. And as such, you don't actually want to read like Charles Dickens because it's terrible and who would want to read that? But the end result here is that we stop reading and those muscles atrophy. And by not using them, your reading gets a little bit less intense. And then also, at least where I went to school at the University of Colorado, we would be assigned readings for my political science courses that were like 50 pages to read on a Tuesday. And the thing is, you didn't actually have to read it. No one cared if you read it. It didn't really affect your grade. You just had to get the basic idea. So what it would train you to do is just skim for like a few words so that you could like raise your hand and get your participation points. And on the LSAT, that totally kills you because you're not getting participation points. You're getting, did you answer the question based on a full understanding of what they have told you? So I think between not reading and then kind of the way undergrads reward people for engaging with course material, people get very, I don't want to say lazy, but lazy is probably the correct term in terms of how they approach questions and reading. And it's a giant issue. So yeah, it's the reading is the issue. It's basically like if you had to sum up my LSAT philosophy into one sentence, it's that the words are hard and the ideas are easy. Like what they hide behind. I mean, so often you will read a sentence and it's like 50 words in reading comp, and it is such a nightmare to like parse out and actually understand. And then once you've actually done the hard work of dissecting it and carving it into what it actually means, you're like, oh, they're just telling us that like this painter was really good at painting. Like that was the whole idea, but they just had to say it in the most dense, complex, terrible way. And further, I think when you like not to get cynical, but I think that when you convince people that you have to teach them all these like magical logical rules and the LSAT is so hard, it makes teaching people a lot longer of a process. And the LSAT industry is an industry. We do make money off this. And one of the ways you make more money is to have people stick around for longer. Like if when I get someone in class, if they stick around for 8 months as opposed to 1 month, I make 8 times the money. Now, I don't know that that's the best goal because should you be aiming for people to stick around? I don't know. Maybe they're going to quit because they're like, Ben, your class sucks. I'm not coming. But I think there is a decent argument that some LSAT prep is geared towards making people stick around forever. Not going to name any names, but there is one company where the curriculum probably goes on for, I don't know how long it is, but it's probably hundreds of hours, if not 100. Either way, it's going to take, like, assuming you work on it for an hour a day, it might take you 4 to 5 months to just get through their curriculum. And that's before they even recommend taking a practice test. And this whole time, this is a company that bills by the month. So it's rather convenient. I mean, I don't know that that's why they have their curriculum. Maybe they just genuinely believe that the best way to learn the LSAT is to learn 1,000 different mini lessons and compound those on each other. But it's rather inefficient. And the way you actually get better at the test is to do questions, which also people don't like to do because who actually likes to sit down and do questions? You fail. That's part of the process. And it's not fun to miss questions. It's a lot easier to read like how many ways can they ask you a weekend question? Which of the following weakens the argument? Which of the following undermines the author's reasoning? And people will legitimately like memorize that where it's like, it's English. They're asking you to make the argument worse. Like, what's wrong with it? And it's, I guess, harder to initially jump into the pool and immerse yourself and I'm going to do questions. But then it starts to connect so much more because you're like, oh, this does make sense. And the way I get it to make sense is to just do questions and review them because it is uncomfortable. But once you get into it, you're like, oh, I'm actually making progress. And I phrase this as like the short-term easy, short-term hard, long-term easy, because it's not easy to sit down and do a test. Like it sucks. You fail, you feel stupid, but it's a lot better than just sitting there for months on end, which is legitimately what often happens, spinning your wheels and trying to, I guess, improve by reading about question types. And the other thing is people actually do like learning without getting better. Like the amount of people that study with some resource and then come to me and they're like, I've been studying for 8 months, yet my score hasn't improved. What should I do? And I tell them to like stop doing what they're doing and they get like offended. It's like, dog, you just told me that you haven't improved in 8 months. Like I thought you knew that this wasn't working. This shouldn't be like a news flash that your process is not optimal. But often people do get like Stockholm syndrome with their lack of improvement. And it is important to differentiate between a lack of like immediate score improvement because it does sometimes take some time to see your score jump up. It's one thing if you're like genuinely not understanding the questions, and it's like if you like they should make perfect sense. If after talking through it, it doesn't make sense and you can't explain it to like, well, maybe you don't need to explain it, but at least the person teaching it to you should be able to explain it at like a fifth grade level. If they can't do that, I think it's just an indication that they're making it more complicated than it is. So that's kind of my whole spiel. And then the other thing is just the usage of LSAT jargon. Like I was on the interwebs and I saw someone refer to a type 1V LSAT question and then a type 1N. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like 1V, 1N? This is just made up. But people love to have their acronyms or their like little phrases. And I don't have literally none. Like I have main point questions. And then I call the other questions on reading comp detail questions because they're asking you about a detail. That's technically not real. That doesn't actually exist on the LSAT. I just call them that. Further, there are paradox questions, which the LSAT doesn't call them that. They're just a weird situation that you have to explain. And then I have my framework of why X, even though Y, which is a way of addressing the paradox. X is the surprising outcome. And then Y is the fact that would lead us to expect something else. So for example, when wolves got reintroduced into Yellowstone, the population of deer actually went up, which is weird because the wolves eat the deer. So when you introduce wolves, you would expect the deer to all get eaten and die. But the paradox needs to address, if they ask you like, hey, why did that happen? You need to address why the wolves actually led to an increase in the deer population. So it could be something like the deer used to get hunted by the wolves, but now, or I should rephrase, the deer used to be hunted by hunters, but now the hunters are hunting the wolves. And so the hunters have turned their attention off to a different animal, allowing the deer population to skyrocket. And the whole point of this is that wasn't meant to be a paradox lesson. It was more so meant to be like I have my phraseology. Why X, even though Y is not a real LSAT thing. I made that up. It's not, I actually don't think anyone else teaches it that way, but you don't have to know that. Like, it is fundamentally asking you to rectify these two facts. It's just a way of making that formulaic. But a lot of LSAT prep will take that to the extreme where they're like, do you have, I mean, I will see this on the interwebs fairly often where people say you need to have an approach for every single LSAT question. I'm like, what are you talking about? They're in English. Like, can you read English? I legitimately did not know LSAT question types when I took the test. And I think that sounds crazy to people when they hear that, but like, I knew them from pattern recognition where you see a question, you're like, okay, they're asking me to weaken it again. They're asking me to strengthen it again. So I knew it in that sense. But in terms of like, I didn't know what a necessary assumption question was. I didn't know what a sufficient assumption question was. Yet I regularly had perfect logical reasoning sections. So it's funny because I think the whole like LSAT knowledge, people feel really good studying, but it just doesn't get people to where they need to be on the test. Okay, well, you have a few logistical things which I want to touch on. So the first of which is when you select your actual LSAT time slot after you register, do you get a notification about it? And yeah, some people, because this person says you heard some people were late to seat selection and thus got bad time slots, and you're quite worried about that. So that is true. You can get issues, but this really comes down to kind of how on top of your email inbox are you? Because LSAC will email you typically 5 to 6 days, I want to say. And the reason I'm not fully confident on this is because they do change things fairly often with how the test is actually administered. The content doesn't change, but a lot of the procedural things do evolve over time. But they will email you typically a few days in advance, and you're able to log on. Back when I took the test in the fall of 2020, it was so flexible. I could take it at any 15-minute interval from like midnight to midnight. Like if I wanted to take it at legitimately 5:30 in the morning, that was available. If I wanted to take it at 9:45, that was also available. I think, logged on pretty quick, or maybe I didn't. I actually don't remember. But either way, it was very, very bright. Then I've also had people have to wake up very early to take the test. Like I had one person once, and she had to wake up at 7 a.m. Eastern time to take the LSAT because I think she like didn't register until the day after. So basically the idea is it gets sent to your email as long. I would just start checking your email like maybe every 4 hours once you're like a week before the test date, or maybe it's 2 weeks. I don't know. I guess I don't have the best answer for this, but it gets emailed to you. And in that email link, they give you like options to register. And then further, I think they tell you when it's going to open up. So I think it's like course registration in college where they're like, it opens on this day. Be ready. If you want to get a good time, sign up. So yes, people have gotten bad times by not being on top of things. Though I think typically if you're like a pretty type A person that puts things in your calendar, you're good to go. And yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I really do use terms like zombie reader very often in terms of reading. It's not to go back to like LSAT big picture strategy, but I really do think the main skill that the LSAT is testing is active reading. And are you understanding what's in front of you? Now, people are often like, oh, I'm an active reader. I mean, for one, I think it's Dunning-Kruger. Like you ask 100 people if they are a good driver, and literally 100 will say, yeah, of course I'm a good driver. Which, of course, we have all been on the roads. We all know that not everyone is a good driver. I think I'm above average, but then again, maybe I'm not. Maybe I also have Dunning-Kruger, and I think I'm a better driver than I am. My fiance would certainly say that I'm not as good of a driver as I think I am. She thinks I tailgate. I don't think I do. Anyways, the point is that people feel the same way about their reading. No one wants to admit they're not good at reading, and it's relative because it's not like you can't read. It's not like you're a first grader who like doesn't know what the word dog means. It's more so, do you understand like very dense sentences, and can you get into the ideas which underlie it? So I often refer to that as zombie reading, where say you read something. I remember this back when I was reading books for school, where you would read a page and you would get through, or even like multiple pages, and suddenly you would have that realization that your eyes had gone over the words, yet you had not processed literally anything for like the past 3 pages. And if that ever happens in the LSAT, you're just dead in the water. Well, I mean, you can go back and fix it, and you will get better at doing it the more you do, because you get calloused to like, I'm actually going to do these questions and not just crank through them. But if you ever like do just kind of take your words over or your eyes over the words, it just kills you. And it is worth noting, it does happen. Like you guys see in class, or you do see in class if you're in class. This is the podcast. So I know some of you aren't in class, obviously. But I will legitimately read a sentence and be like, I don't know what they just said. Like we got to go back and parse this out and see what they're actually saying. And there's no shame in that. Like we're humans, we're not perfect robots. But you do have to actually have that recognition to pause, slow down, and like level with yourself and be like, I didn't understand that to the level that I need to hold myself to. And when people hold themselves to a low standard and they're like, yeah, it was good enough, I'm just going to move on, that's where they get killed. Okay. And yeah, what else do we have? So the kind of final topic before we do the personal statement is whether or not the LSAT should be taken in person or remote. Because this is a question you get a lot, and people's inclination is that you should take it in person. For one, in person is only available in certain parts of the country. And by that, I don't mean like there are states that don't have it, but there kind of are. Because if you look up prometric test sites, and you can all do this, for example, in the state of Colorado, where I lived for a long time when they initially started doing prometric, I think they only have 3 prometric sites in the whole state. There's one in Longmont, there's one, and this is for just for Colorado people. There's one in Denver, then there's one in Colorado Springs. But like if you live in Fort Collins, which is not a small city, there is literally no prometric site unless you drive like an hour the day of. If you live in the mountains, like up in the ski towns, there's no prometric. You're driving 4 to 5 hours to take the test. So for those people, I think there's a very good argument that you should just take it remote because you can take it from your office or your bedroom. And yes, there is the possibility that your roommates or your family are going to be obnoxious and intrude on you, which that's kind of tricky because I would say like set boundaries. I know people have different interpersonal situations and like maybe your family's awful or your roommates are awful. That's just tough. Like I don't really know what to tell you other than try to do your best. But taking it in person is often logistically difficult. I'm gonna look up like let's look at what's another kind of state. I'll look at Wyoming just to see where they have ones. So in Wyoming, they have one prometric, which is in Casper. That is not in Cheyenne, which is the biggest city, which is kind of like saying Jumbo Shrimp, the biggest city in Wyoming. It's like, oh, they have 7 people as opposed to nobody. But there is one in Casper, which I'm sure how many of you have ever even heard of Casper, Wyoming. Probably about no one. Apologies to our Wyoming listeners. Anyways, the point is logistically difficult. That being said, if we go to Florida, just so I know we have a lot of Florida listeners, there is one in, it's not loading, but yeah, there's a good amount. There's 3 in Miami, but that's not the most. There's one in Hollywood, one in Deerfield Beach, and then one in Palm Beach Gardens. That's only 3 though. And like Miami's a pretty big metro area. In There's 2 in is that Tallahassee? No, that's Tampa. There's 2 in Tampa, 1 in Orlando. So like these are not common. Like it is a logistical difficulty to actually find a prometric. And as such, I would at least be open to taking it online. I personally think taking it online is easier in that you get to take it in the conditions that you control. You don't have to travel. It's how you practice. And as such, there's a benefit to taking it that way. But it really is up to you in terms of what you want to do. So take it where you're most comfortable. For me, that would be taking it online, but there's nothing wrong with taking it in person. Although people are often like, oh, I've heard all these horror stories about people taking it online. The proctors are poorly trained. That is true. A lot of the proctors are pretty poorly trained and are not great. That is also true in person. Like they're not awesome in person either. You will have people like, you guys have been to stores. Does every store have awesome service? Like, no. And there are proctors that don't really understand what's going on. They only administer the LSAT 8 times a year. So especially if you have accommodations, they often don't know what's going on. Further, you are taking it among other testing people, which might be loud. They might be coughing the whole time. They might be, which that was just a report that I heard from someone who took the February test, that someone was coughing literally the whole time, which could be distracting. And anyways, it kind of just comes down, if you take it at Prometric, it's a bit of a gamble. If you take it online, you might deal with technical difficulties, but you control your environment and you don't have to travel. So my verdict is taken online, although fundamentally it doesn't really matter. It's the same price either way. It just comes down to like what works with your life. Cool. And yeah, so there's another question about what do I think about the increase in LSAT scores and the percentage of people scoring higher scores in recent LSATs. So it's a little tricky. We actually don't know that people are scoring higher on the recent LSAT. What we do know is that there are more applicants with higher scores, but scores are valid for 5 years. So they might be people that took the test back with logic games. My sample is I know a lot of people did that. Like they took the test and are just now applying. So they would have taken the test maybe roughly this time last year or maybe a little later, and then they applied for this cycle, which is very common. Then the other thing is LSAC percentiles are up. So you can see on the LSAT, when they release the scores, they will say like, oh, a 172 is the 99th percentile, which is no longer the case. That used to be the case. Then it was a 173. And nowadays, I believe it's a 174. But here's the thing. They're not calculating that 99th percentile based on that last administration. It's a moving average. And that moving average is of the past 3 years. So that 99th percentile of a 174 is like 80% logic game scores. And so the scores might be going up, but it's too early to know that it's actually this new format. I think that the new format is actually a little bit more difficult in that logic games, obviously people listening have not taken, or at least most of you probably didn't do logic games. But logic games, while initially difficult, was very solvable. People could get it to a very formulaic thing where you could just kind of zone out and crank through them and you would get them all right. Obviously, that's with prep. People didn't start there, but you would get there. LR and reading comp, you do not get to zone out. You have to be very locked in and actually paying attention. So I think it's a harder test. Although there's one caveat, which is now you are only studying 2 skills instead of studying 3 skills. So theoretically, your study time should take 2/3 as long. So that's one possible benefit, which is that it just takes less time to master the 2 sections than it did to master 3 sections. The other thing is more people are taking the test. I'm a believer that part of it has to do with the economy and that a lot of people are not finding jobs they're excited about out of undergrad, or they're being laid off from jobs that they did have. And now they're like, I'm a smart person. Law looks like a pretty stable career. I'm going to go do law. So I think a lot of it has to do with the broader economy. Then further, there's just a lot of applications this year, which jacks up things because, for one, election years tend to get more people stoked up about law school because I guess there's a few reasons. Maybe they want to make a difference. I guess that's the main one. And as such, they apply because it's more of a pressing issue when there's an election year. But yeah, the question does go on though. Some institutions claim that it is making law school application a lot harder in the sense that score alone is not enough to be a top applicant. Yeah, it's relative because I would say score alone is not enough to be a top applicant, but it depends on the school. Like at Harvard and Yale, that's absolutely true. You require more than just being a top applicant. Though that falls off pretty quick. If you're a 175 at Michigan and you have a lot of it also is GPA dependent, but it's not as holistic as they pretend. If you have a 175 in Michigan and you don't write like a psycho, you got a pretty good shot. That being said, you do need good essays, and people also have Dunning-Kruger with their essays. Everyone thinks they have good essays. I promise you, not everyone does. Most people's are actually pretty bad. So often people are like, I got rejected with great numbers and I had great essays. And then you look at their essays and you're like, turns out you actually didn't have great essays. I can tell you exactly why you got rejected. And as such, that's part of it. So yeah, technically a high score is not enough, but high scores are still very powerful. If you have a high LSAT score, you're still going to get great offers. And are they simply trying to make people fear and monetize on that? There's definitely some of that. This is why you have to kind of take everything with a grain of salt from literally everyone in the LSAT space, including me. Not to say that, I tell you guys the truth. I really pride myself on that. But also, whenever I say something, it's a very valid question to ask, why? Why is that? Because if someone can't answer why, they might be selling you some bullshit. And often the admissions consultants are selling bullshit in terms of talking about how much essays matter. I guess the kind of fair rebuttal here would be well, Ben, you're an LSAT teacher. Of course, you're going to say the LSAT matters more. And it's okay, fair. That's a fair rebuttal. The data does not lie. You can look at the admissions data of who they admit. There's websites that visualize this. There's one that's called lsd.law, and you can look at how they admit people based on their numbers. It's not perfect data because it's self-reported, but what you'll see is that it is not very holistic. You can predict pretty aggressively just based on someone's numbers how well they do. So there is some of that. The other, I'd say, area that you want to be very careful of in terms of the kind of spiel that you'll get this time of year that is technically true, but also missing a lot of context is applying late. Because taking the April or June LSAT and applying is pretty rough. The reason for this is that law school is not often as hard to get into as people perceive. It is, to get into a law school is actually fairly straightforward. It's just you need an average LSAT score and a bachelor's degree. If you have that, you will get into law school. That's a guarantee. The question is that a school worth attending at the price they're going to charge you? Because the thing about law school is that employment is rather segregated. There are 2 peaks in terms of law school grads of people that make money. There is about 20% of people that make $225,000-ish. And this is scaling with inflation. So by the time you guys will graduate come 3-4 years from now, it'll be higher. It'll be, 260, 245. It'll keep going up as living costs go up and the US dollar loses value. But then the other 80% make about somewhere between 50 to 80K a year, which there's no shame in that. There's nothing wrong with making less money, but it's not often what people go to law school envisioning. They go to law school envisioning, I'm, going to have a very stable, high paying career. And for what's worth, if you end up in one of those jobs, let's say you start at 70K at the DA's office or the something, and you stick with it for the next 10 years, you're not going to be making 70K forever. It will go up, but you are still making 70K those first couple of years. If you're not going to the big firms pay well and the rest kind of do not. It is a bit of an oversimplification in that, yes, are there some good paying jobs outside of the big firms? Technically, are they that's also saying that, you can smoke cigarettes and eat Wendy's and live to 100. Does that exist? Sure. It's a terrible plan though. It happens to almost no one. So functionally, there's 2 worlds of the lawyers. There are the high paid firm lawyers. And once again, people do exit. Like, if you want to make a lot of money in law, the big firm is the way to go. They start out paying you a ton and the scale gets up pretty aggressive. I don't have the Kravitz scale in front of me, but I will pull it up just for reference. But so it starts at 220-ish. Yeah, so first year is making 225 with a $20,000 bonus. That's 245. Your second year, you make 235 with a $30,000 bonus for total compensation of 265. Your third year out of law school, you make 260 base with 58K in a bonus for a total comp of 317. By your fifth year, you're making 355 base with a 90K bonus for 445. And this is pretty lockstep. So even if you just stay as an associate, by year 5, you're making about $500,000 a year, which is obviously very good money. It's worth noting that you work really hard to get that pay. Like, these people are not working 40 hours a week. They are working very often 60 to 80 hours a week. You get paid very well, and they give you lots of nice perks. One of our friends, I live in Austin for those of you that don't know, and one of our friends is a first-year associate at a law firm. I won't name drop it because I don't. Well, it's maybe you'd recognize it. I don't know. It's not Kirkland and Ellis, so it's not one of the big ones, but it is a big firm. And she works a lot. Like, she grinds. Like, it's a lot of work. She does get pretty good perks. Like, they hook her up with food. They've got coffee in the office, like nice coffee, not some crappy Keurig. It's like they hook her up. They also have Zins, which she doesn't do, but like the little nicotine pouches, which I think is funny. They have Red Bulls stocked up. They have food and whatnot. And it's like, it sounds like a party. Like, she rubs elbows with a lot of really rich people. The downside is she is there like from 7 to 7 pretty much every day. And by every day, I don't mean like weekends off. Like, she often takes a Sunday off, but it's like 6 days a week. And then often, you go home at 7 and you got a project until 1 a.m. So if you are like a workaholic and you love working and you love money, then going to big law is a great option. Like, if that's what you want to do, if you are a smart kid and you just want to make money, there are not many better paths that guarantee it than going to big law. The downside is that it comes with this very intense work-life balance. And you like, by work-life balance, I should say lack thereof. There is no work-life balance. You are just a professional, like, on-call legal monkey for your firm. So if you want that, it's great. If you don't want that, not so great. It is also worth noting that if you work at those firms, you can often exit after a couple years and get more reasonable work-life balance by exiting to like an in-house position. That being said, you do not go in-house after working at the DA's office. So remember, even if you want the like in-house jobs, you still have to basically set yourself up for a big law. And then those will pay like, I mean, I don't know this quite as well, but I think they pay like kind of the low 6 figures, like 200K-ish. But you have like actually a 40-hour, 50-hour work week as opposed to like a 70-hour work week. It's also worth noting that if you make partner at these big firms, the money does get pretty crazy. Like, because partner checks, like, once you are a partner, you can legitimately make 7 figures a year, multi 7 figures. Not easy, but if you are just here for the money, going to work at a big firm is the move. If you're not here for the money, this is probably a pretty bad segment for you. You probably don't care, but it is worth noting that it's not that everyone gets 6 figures. In fact, only about 20% of law school grads are getting those high paid salaries upon graduation. So what I would caution you all to do is just to be very careful with the schools you apply to. There is, I don't want to sound like a hater here, but there's one girl on TikTok and she posted a tip because she's in law school. She's a first year at some law school in, I want to say either Kansas or Missouri. And she said that grades don't matter. And I was like, they do though, because hiring is based on grades. But then I looked up her law school. And the thing is, out of her law school, literally no one goes to big law. So it doesn't matter. Like, she's actually right. Grades don't matter because those opportunities never existed in the first place. If you're going to most schools where some segment of the graduating class does get to go to big firms, your grades do matter. They matter a shit ton. Because if you are in the top 10% versus the top 20%, that could be the difference between you get to work at this big firm or you are working at the DA's office making 60K. And that's not meant to be scary, but like, the pressure's on if you go down this field. Now, you can kind of hedge these bets. If you go to Harvard, it doesn't matter where you are in the grades. Harvard grads get these jobs if they want them and if they're willing to do the work. You still have to do the work, obviously. If you don't do the work, they're going to fire you. But it was just funny because it's like, oh yeah, no, the grades don't matter at your school because literally no one goes to these high-paying jobs. So she's technically not wrong. Also, she's kind of like missing context there because it's like, yes, you're right, the grades don't matter at your school, but the reason they don't matter is because you guys all make like 50K upon graduation. Which, this isn't meant to be scary. It's just, you all should really understand the reality of this. This is a very much so segregated field. Maybe segregated is the wrong word, or maybe it is the right word, between the people at the top and the people at the bottom. There are like the riches of the lawyers and there are the poors of the lawyers. And you just, And there's nothing wrong. Like if you are here because you want to make a difference, you want to help people and you want to like be a prosecutor or you want to be like a public defender, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Like more power to you. It is not a bad living. The benefits are great. You do make more money. You don't stay at these low salaries forever. They don't get high. Like you're not going to make 200K working as a DA unless you live in like a really high cost of living area, at which point the 200K is going to get eaten up pretty quickly. But you get good benefits and you get to like do the work you want to do, just with the caveat that don't go into a lot of debt because it's going to be really hard to pay off your loans if you're making 200K. There is program, I mean, not to totally tangent, but there are programs that are based on public service, but these are super sketch. Like 3% of people that plan on using them actually end up using them. The success rate on people that go to law school and they're like, oh, I'm going to get my loans forgiven by doing public service, like loan forgiveness. It's like if you serve for the overall society, we forgive your loans. That actually ends up not being very successful. And so it's a really bad plan to go in counting on them. The amount of people that don't end up actually getting their balances forgiven is really high. And so if you make a decision to take out like $300,000 in debt, which is a real number that people actually take out to go to these schools, and then it turns out you don't qualify for some like weird reason, or like let's say the administration just axes them because these are not protected programs. There's nothing to stop the government from just saying those don't exist anymore. And not to like point to the state of the like world right now, but those programs could very well go bye-bye. So you really do not want to be counting on like my financial future is dependent upon the president not like getting rid of this program, which they could. So anyways, that gets into scholarships. We'll go through that in another day. I did promise someone a personal statement, so I want to bang that out. And I will share this for people that are here so that you can see it. One moment, folks. Bad radio, bad radio. That's the wrong one. Alrighty. Hold on. Let me remove the person's name just so that. Actually, I'll just read it myself instead of sharing it. You guys will still get the full listening experience. So here we have, and with personal statements, real quickly, I'm just going to touch on some big mistakes. The biggest mistake is to kind of focus on why law school. This is like the biggest piece of advice that just will not die, is that the law schools care why you go to law school. They actually don't. The law schools care why you are going to be a kick-ass law student and help them have a better like prestige in the world by producing a kick-ass lawyer that is going to represent their brand and be like, oh, I went to X law school. And when people see you, they're like, that person kicks ass, therefore they associate you with their law school. What they don't actually care about is why you want to be a lawyer. The drive doesn't really matter. They care about the end result, which is, are you going to crush it? Are you going to help us be more prestigious? But this is a general rule of life that will help you be more effective, which is that people don't care about you. People care about them. Like if I tell you guys about what my 10-year vision of LSAT prep is, you guys might be superficially interested, but realistically, you don't care what I'm up to in 10 years. Because like it's fine. And there's nothing wrong with that, but like it doesn't really affect you. It's a nice thought, I guess, but fundamentally what I'm up to doesn't matter to you. What matters to you is, you know, your career and like what you're going to be up to. So if I tell you what I'm up to, you guys are like, Ben, no one cares. Like that's good for you. Nice vision board that you have there, but that doesn't affect me. Like that's nice. And law schools are kind of the same way. They don't actually care about your vision board. They care about how do you help them with their vision board. And their vision board is being a kick-ass law school that produces kick-ass attorneys. So often people really focus on their purpose and their drive. And it's not that that's bad. It's that you have to frame it in a way that shows the school why you are a positive contribution to their school, not why you want to go to law school. Because everyone applying to law school wants to go to law school. And as such, it's not interesting. They don't care. They're like, yeah, of course you want to go to law school. You're applying. We knew that. Like literally everyone applying wants to go to law school. What we care about is why should we accept you based upon the fact that you're applying. And this is where a lot of, it is the number one advice you hear when you're like, what do I write my personal statement about? Everyone says, why law? They assume that you want to go to law school. You don't have to convince them. Like, yes, if you had some giant career in like STEM, like you were like a doctor for 20 years and now you're applying to law school, you should probably explain briefly why, but your whole statement does not need to be like why you want to go to law school. It would be way better to be like, I was a doctor. I kicked ass as a doctor. And here's why I want to go to law school very briefly. Like, I mean, one sentence, and then they connect like, oh, this person already kicked ass as a doctor. Therefore, they will also kick ass as a lawyer. So anyways, thank you to the person that submitted this. I will keep it anonymous and we'll give feedback. I also think we mentioned about you. I think we had talked about for this person, they have a longer one. It's about 4 pages, but I don't think they had written a diversity statement. So we'll also probably split some things and be like, hey, this might be good diversity statement content. A quick just definitions for people that are a little bit newer to the admissions essays. A personal statement is kind of like your why you're going to be a kick-ass lawyer. I like to frame it as what you have done or why you were going to crush it. Whereas that diversity statement is a little bit, I mean, for one, realistically, they're trying to see if you are a URM, which is either Black or Hispanic. So if you are URM, you should tell them because they want to know. Like whether or not you agree with that is not the point. The point is that it gives you an advantage. Lawyers take advantages, so I would take your advantage. Further, it is meant to show like where you come from. So kind of all the like backstory. Often people talk about their childhood in their personal statement. It really doesn't belong in their personal statement. It's not that it doesn't belong in your essay. It's that's the wrong spot. Your personal statement is why do you kick ass? Your diversity statement is like here's who I am. Here's what I bring. So that's kind of the dichotomy. And as we go through this statement, I imagine, I mean, even just from glancing at it, I can see a few points where I'll probably recommend things along those lines. So this is also 4 pages. Quick note is that 4 pages is generally too long. Typically it's 2 pages, double spaced each. But given that you have, I believe, this one statement and you're going to be breaking it up, you can potentially go from there. So it opens and starts by saying, since the young age of 4, I've been repeatedly asked, do you want to be a lawyer when you grow up? So immediately I always just like to pause and ask, what have we learned after one sentence? I'm like, okay, I guess when you were a child, you exhibited traits that may have made people think that you want to be a lawyer. This is not always a compliment. Sometimes this is a bit of an insult where they're like, you're combative. It could also be interpreted as maybe you argue a lot, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but like this isn't really a point in your favor either. It's just that I guess this is origin story of you had some trait of a lawyer. It might have been positive, it might have been negative. We don't really know. And I'm also picturing you as like legitimately a toddler, which is not great. I want to be picturing you as like an adult who is kicking ass in life and like crushing it, whereas you are legitimately a toddler here. So I don't love the opening because if I got interrupted, like let's say that I get a text that I have to respond to, and they're like, hey, you just started that person's application file. What do you know about them? And I was like, they're a toddler. That's not the fact that we want in their head. We want to start strong. I want to start with like, you are kicking ass. I don't know how you kick ass. I imagine we're going to get to some ideas that we can use, but I want to open strong. Be like, if someone gets interrupted after sentence 1, that sentence 1 is like the most important sentence. And being a toddler just isn't that. But let's see what else we have. I've always been curious to know what specifically leads friends, families, and even cashiers, I mean, at the grocery store to ask me this question. So that doesn't really add much. It's just like, okay, you're wondering why they're asking, do you want to be a lawyer? I guess it probably, I mean, my inclination was it's probably like your affect, like maybe you're a little bit combative, which is not a bad thing. Like if you're going to be a lawyer, being assertive and combative, it can often be a very good thing. I don't really care that you're curious though. We really want to stick to the facts here. And it's not that it hurts, it's that it takes up space. Like we talked about, you only get 2 pages. And as such, every word has to be very like explicitly used for a purpose. And every line has to serve a lot. And that's about 2 lines, that sentence. It's just like, okay, sure. They have this perception of you. We're curious why, but also we're kind of not curious. Like I would just rather say, and they thought this because X. Like realistically, I'm going in a totally different direction to open this up. But if I were to keep this, I would still cut that sentence. They continue. You would think that the constant questioning would eventually become burdensome or overwhelming, but it did the exact opposite. All right, so we're saying that maybe it would get annoying for people to be like, why are you going to be a lawyer? I don't know. I don't know that I would think that. I don't know that it would be burdensome. So I would also be careful with telling the admissions officers what they would think. Not that that's like the worst sentence construction. I just probably wouldn't say, I would never say you would think, regardless of what follows. Like even if it says you would think that puppies are cute, probably just don't say that just because we're kind of putting thoughts in their head and we don't want to be explicitly telling them what they think. But okay, sure. Let's continue. I've always felt validated in my calling to practice law, and I'm grateful that others have validated that calling after brief interactions. So we're about 5 lines in, and so far we've learned you're a toddler, or you were a toddler. People thought you were going to be a lawyer, and you really want to be a lawyer, that you've been validated, which is nice. I like that from a personal perspective. I don't love that from an admissions perspective. The fact that you want to be a lawyer just isn't quite that powerful. We want to know why you will be a kick-ass lawyer. How are you going to contribute to this law school you're applying to? And they're like, yeah, you've wanted to be a lawyer, which, while nice, is not really moving the ball forward in terms of why do we need to admit this person? I want the admissions officer reading your application to be going to the meeting like, this person kicks so much ass, we need them at our law school. Like they are such a winner that we need to take them. And here, there's nothing bad. It's just like, you want to be a lawyer, like you and everyone else applying. So it just doesn't differentiate you. And we want your admissions officer to be going to bat for you after they've read your essay. They continue. It is a privileged feeling to have which for one, you do spell privilege correctly. So a lot of people mess that up. You didn't. So congrats on that. To have my path revealed to me so young and to feel as strongly towards it in my 20s. Yeah, it's nice. You've stuck with it. I still would prefer to see what you've done, but it's a nice thought, which is that I mean, I would cut it. Like, even after saying it's a nice thought, I would still cut it because we do want to be more about like what you've done. At age 4, I wanted to be a lawyer because I thought they were allowed to talk as much as they wanted to prove their point. Just like how I would never stop talking until I proved my point. All right, so we're saying that you were kind of, I guess, I don't want to say combative because maybe that's the wrong adjective, but you were willing to like go to bat for yourself as a child, which it's not bad. It's just also like I'm seeing you as a 4-year-old, and you're gonna get to cool stuff here. So like I would lean more into kind of the adult things that you accomplish. They continue. At age 15, I wanted to be a lawyer because teen court showed me the intricacies of our justice system and allowed me to present a case before a judge, opposing counsel, and a jury. So I still don't love this because you're a 15-year-old, and 15-year-olds are fundamentally children, but it is better. You are actively doing things. I don't know what teen court is, but I'm imagining this is like mock trial or something of the sorts. I really hope this is not like you being brought up for like a minor in possession or something. I don't think it is. I imagine this is more of like an extracurricular, but occasionally you'd be surprised what people put in their personal statements. So when I read teen court, I'm like, were you going to court as a teen, or was this more of like a LARPing activity? Because if it's more of the like you were doing extracurriculars, that's really cool. It's better. I still don't love that you're 15. I prefer to see you as a more adult person, but it's in the right direction. They continue. At age 23, I want to be a lawyer because I've remained committed to ensuring that justice remains a right for all at the local, state, and federal levels. So I love that. That is a really good idea, but we want to show that. We don't want to tell them. I'm sure you've done things where you have done like some level of working with people or advocacy. By showing that, you can show how you really care about justice and making sure that everyone has rights without conclusively telling them. Because when you say, I want to help people, they're like, do ya? But if you say, I volunteer at this thing, I've helped with this movement, it's a lot more powerful. And I'm almost sure that we're going to get there. Like just from looking ahead, I can see you have this stuff. So I would really lead with like what you've done. It's so much more powerful. And we continue. So this is the second paragraph. We're at the end of the first page. They continue. Some might call me type A, which I wouldn't say that because once again, like, you're the one writing this, so I wouldn't say what other people say. Like, you can just say what you say. But I find great value in setting some foundation before going headfirst into any of my endeavors. That's very broad. I want just like, what do you mean by that? So I would cut that sentence and go from there. Shortly after I graduated from the redacted university, I began working at, we'll say redacted, Attorneys at Law, which has now become the cornerstone of all my legal knowledge. Oh yeah, so you're working at some law firm. What did you do? Like, I'm sure you did stuff. Did you help them out? Did you like file documents? Even if it's pretty basic stuff, well, you can just talk about what you did because like showing yourself actually being active, it makes them go, okay, this person, they're 23 and realistically their expectations of a 23-year-old are a little bit lower. They know you guys haven't lived as much life. You haven't had as much work experience. So you get a little bit of a, I wouldn't say pass, but they're not expecting as much from you in terms of what you've done. And so I would just say like, that you did it. Like you don't have to like upplay it. Not that I'm saying you are, but just give them what you did. Like I did X, whether it's like doing documents or like emailing clients or like whatever you did. They continue. Working in a law firm before law school was non-negotiable for me. I like that. Also, I would just prefer to see what you did. I wanted to understand what the daily life of an attorney was truly like before solidifying my choice to pursue law further. I totally agree with that. I think all of you should know what being a lawyer looks like before you go to law school. Also, the law schools don't care. So I would just cut that. Although I do like this next sentence. I've had the opportunity to draft pleadings, sort through discovery, read through case law, and more, all because of the potential one firm saw in me. So I would just cut the fact that they saw potential in you. We want you to be an obvious thing. We want it to be that you walked in and they're like, this person kicks so much ass, we need them at our law firm. So I would like, because when you say that, it's almost like, oh, they took a chance on you. I don't want them to take a chance on you. Even if that was true, that's not the perception we want to give them. We want to be like, you were such an obvious kick-ass applicant, even if you weren't, that it was so obvious that they had to have you at your firm because you were just going to make them so much money. It's ridiculous. So anyways, but I do love what you're saying you did. You drafted pleadings, you sorted through discovery, sometimes going into a story, like talking about a case you worked on, or like a discovery where you like discovered some piece of evidence that I guess was relevant to the trial. Well, it's only one story. The person can then extrapolate it, or the reader can extrapolate it into this person kicks ass. Here's an example of them kicking ass. Therefore, they will continue to kick ass. So like there's literally all the pieces of an elite personal statement here. I would just like really reshift things. So we continue. Every successful deliverable I submit to my attorney legitimizes my belief that I'm already where I need to be, or sorry, exactly where I need to be, which once again, that's great. I would cut that just because like, we don't need to know what you think. Like the author will, or not the author, the reader will get there. They will believe you. Like, I believe you. I believe you're going to be a kick-ass person based on this, but we can frame it in such a better way to where they're just like forced to believe you. Because I'm kind of on your side going into this, but the reader is not. The reader is reading 100 of these or like thousands of these. And as such, they're just like, Maybe I like this person, maybe I don't. I don't really care. I'll take them if I like them, if I don't, whatever. And as such, we really want to lead with our best foot forward. And the best way to do that is to just talk about how you kick ass, as opposed to this very abstract, like they saw potential. All right, and we are one page in, and that took me a while. So we'll go a little bit faster. So this is the next paragraph. At the forefront of my upbringing was my mother, and I'll redact her name. A woman of many titles, single parent, medical professional, matriarch among her siblings, and of our small but mighty family made up of me and my sister. So this is nice. Your mom raised you. It sounds like she was a single mom. Also, we're not admitting your mom to law school. It's totally fine to have her as an inspiration. I would probably put that in a diversity statement. That's definitely more of like where you come from, but I don't dislike it. I would just move where it is in your application. They continue. But even more notable than the titles that she's gained throughout her life's journey is the fact that she immigrated from Haiti to New York at the age of 17. Yeah, that's cool. I would want to tie that into how that like gave you a perspective, but it's interesting. Once again, diversity statement content, but like I wouldn't feel the need to remove that. Culturally, my mother excelled at raising my sister and me as Haitians, but struggled to bridge the gap between also raising American children. Okay, that's actually really good diversity statement content because you're being raised by a Haitian immigrant mother in America, and that's obviously logistically difficult because she's new to the country. It's how hard would it be for any of us to raise kids in a country where we didn't go through that same process? I imagine most of us were raised here in the US. I don't know that for sure. But what we do know is that like if I went to like, I don't know, Mexico and I tried to raise children there, I would probably do a pretty bad job. I don't want to say bad job. I'm not saying your mother did a bad job, but rather it's hard. It's a set of challenges because you just don't even understand what the children are going through because you didn't go through it. So I'm like, yeah, that is difficult. And this is interesting because now you can talk about the perspective that imparted on you from having this kind of unique experience in that you were raised by a mom who had immigrated from Haiti. They continue. This resulted in instances where I had to fight for chances to do the most harmless childhood activities. Yeah, I would say what they were. You don't want to bury the lead here. Like I would talk about what they were. Like, was it like skateboarding down the street, going to a movie, and your mom was nervous? Like, I wouldn't say like the most harmless. I would just say what it was. They continue. Most of my peers wouldn't think twice about hanging out with friends on Saturday and Sunday or planning last minute sleepovers, but I did. Okay, so that's good. You're giving me examples. I would just lead with that right away. I would cut the sentence before. For my mother, even going over to a cousin's house was something that required months of planning and intention. This trained me to build my case for things I felt passionate about attending from a young age. I see. So you're gonna say like I had to advocate to like go hang out with my friends. I don't hate it. I don't love it either though, because once again, we're picturing you as a child, and I don't want to picture you as a child. I want to picture you as a kick-ass adult. So like this could be a little bit diversity statement content. I would definitely keep it to a diversity statement if you are going to keep it. And honestly, it could be a pretty good diversity statement. You just have to, I'd say, play with it to make sure it comes off well. They continue. For making PowerPoint presentations on why socializing with my peers is fundamental for one's development to finding studies on why social interaction outside of the home and school is important, I worked hard to gain her approval. I've been going through the motions to build, present, and support my case for as long as I can remember. Yeah, I mean, I'd play with it a little bit more. I'd give more details. Like, I'd go more explicitly into one situation where like maybe you successfully convinced her to go to like some event, whether it's like a concert or some like school dance or I don't know, just like whatever it is, you know better than I do. Because the specifics, while it's like, yes, these documents are meant to be all about you, the best way to show that is through specific examples and be like, here's a case, like I wanted to, I don't know, go to the concert. And here's how I convinced my mom this would be like a once in a lifetime experience. Here's how I presented it. I did like this research. I don't know what it looks like, but when you go into detail, it makes the whole picture make more sense. Because you're like, oh, while we only learned about this one circumstance, I can reasonably expect that this also happened in all the other circumstances. And then I can also expect that then, this person will come and then apply this to the various challenges that they face in law school and then as a lawyer. So I would just go a little bit more in detail and stuff like that. They continue. Advocacy has always come naturally to me. I have no issue putting myself in uncomfortable situations if I know it is for the greater good. It's very abstract. I would cut that. I'd just be more specific. Like, what advocacy have you done? It's a lot more powerful. I hate to see people wrong and I hate to be wrong. That's good, but also like I don't care. Like it's good in like that I agree. It's bad in that it's not really moving the ball forward. Like what we need is like what advocacy have you done? It's so much more powerful. They continue. My perseverance may sometimes be mistaken as stubbornness. I would really not focus on how other people might perceive you. It just doesn't matter. Like maybe it's true, maybe people do, but it doesn't matter what they think. Like, you're going to be a kick-ass lawyer. If people think you're stubborn, like who cares? Screw them. So I would just kind of drop those phrases. Like when you say like people might call me type A or people might call me stubborn, you just don't need that. So I would cut those. They continue, but that misconception does not faze me. Yeah, I agree. Just cut it then. You don't need it. It drives my strong commitment to making sure the truth is out there. So yeah, once again, this whole prelude I would cut and kind of just get to like what happened. They continue. Throughout high school, I was proud to hold the position of class president, which is nice. It's a lot of it depends on how big the school is, because that could be really crazy if it's like a big school. Further, it's you in high school once again, which I would really prefer. Like I know you're a little bit younger, but because you say you're 23, I would still try to focus more on kind of like the recent as opposed to high school. I took this title seriously and I ensured I stayed true to myself. My values were brought into question when the VP pulled me into his office and told me I must stand for the pledge during morning attendance because I was class president. Okay. So for what's worth, most admissions officers do believe in standing for the pledge. This could be interpreted against you. I think it depends a lot on how you write the rest of it. Because if like, and for what's worth, I think what you write isn't bad, but I would just be aware that this will automatically get you denied from some schools. They'll just be like, you didn't stand for the pledge. You're not coming here. Not all schools. Some schools are totally not going to care at all. And for what's worth, I would say most probably won't care, but there is some small set, largely depending on like what states you're applying. Like realistically, if you're applying to like the more kind of red states, like if you're applying to like UF, this could hurt you. If you're applying to like Harvard, I don't think they care. So it's very dependent on kind of the school you're looking at. But I would just be careful that something like not standing for the pledge is something that could potentially, and that doesn't mean you have to lie, like don't lie, but you can omit and just not say it if you want to, like go to Florida, for example. They continue. At the time, oh, sorry, I reread that. I was choosing not to stand for the pledge in solidarity with my peers who are not American born and were practicing their First Amendment rights. I don't see what them not being born in America means. Because I mean, everyone has First Amendment rights, but even if you're not born here, you can still stand for the pledge. Not that you have, like, this is not meant to be a judgment on standing for the pledge, but I will say that a lot of people are not going to be sympathetic to this argument. So I would just tread cautiously with that. They continue. My VP told me that I did not have that choice and needed to stand because of the position I held. Yeah, so they're wrong, obviously. Like your VP is obviously incorrect here. Whether or not people like it, you certainly have the right to stand or not stand. It's that being said, the right versus whether or not an admissions officer will like this are two separate things. Because even though they're like, yes, technically you're correct, they might be like, I also don't want you at our school. So I'll just be very careful. They continue. Though I understood his perspective, I politely declined. Sure. His response was to misuse the power of his position. I wouldn't say misuse. I would just say what he did, because we'll get to its misuse. Like we will understand that he like went above what he should have done. But when we say misuse, it kind of sounds conclusive. So I would just say that because you say his response was to misuse the power of his position and attempt to force me to comply by calling my mother and writing me up. Yeah, so I would just cut the misuse of the power of his position. Because if you just say he attempted to force you to comply, it's the same meaning, but there's no judgment there. It's just like, this is what happened. And you let the reader get there on their own. They'll be like, wow, this guy's a jerk. Why is he doing that? That he's way out of his lane. So I would just cut the misuse of the power of his position. They continue. Not that calling a woman who has suffered under the hands of Western imperialism would have helped his case. I took this opportunity to simply show him the Supreme Court ruling that stated my peers and I did not have to stand. Yeah, I mean, I might cut the first clause there about the Western imperialism and the fact that your mother was not the biggest fan of. I mean, it's a little weird. I could see someone being a little like, this seems mildly contradictory in that you are exercising the First Amendment and then also I guess Western imperialism you could argue is separate from the First Amendment, but it is part of Western civilization. Anyways, the point is that I would just be careful. Some schools will be more inclined to like this, others won't. Like I said, it will largely be based upon where they're located. That's not a perfect proxy. There are relatively liberal people at conservative schools and vice versa. But as a general rule, I will say the more like kind of left-wing states are going to like react to this a little bit better. Because that is the thing that I see is that the schools do kind of operate based upon the state that they're in as a general rule. They continue. An essential part of being an American citizen is the autonomy afforded to me by holding that status. Sure, yeah, of course. I refuse to allow others the opportunity to take that right away from me, especially through abusing their power. Yeah, I would focus more on what you did. Like, did you print it out? I mean, I like the idea here, which is that you're like advocating for your rights. That's nice. It runs on a little long, but it's an okay story. I would probably pick a different one, just in that this one, I mean, it's high risk, high reward. Some people will like it. Like, I'm not saying this is all negative. I'm saying it's some negative. Some schools are really going to come down harshly on this. Other schools are going to like it. But generally, I would probably go with a lower risk story. They continue. The ability to express my freedoms and rights is not lost on me. I will uphold that when I'm a sworn attorney. You don't need to say that. We got that. We got that you like are a big advocate. Often when you say this statement, like, therefore, I'm going to hold these rights and freedoms as an attorney, the reader got there already. So you don't have to say it explicitly. So I would actually kind of cut that sentence and just kind of leave it and be like, mic drop, like crushed it. I stood up for myself. And then the reader gets there very reasonably that therefore this person will continue to stand up for themselves. They continue. Knowledge is my power, and that is what I want to bring to my future life every day as a lawyer. Yeah, sure. I'd also cut that for the same reason. All right, I'll go a little faster through this final page and a half just to wrap up in a reasonable amount of time. They continue. My sister redacted and I have a 5-year age gap. This became code for she can watch Law and Order SVU at age 15, but you cannot. So is she older, I think? Or is she younger? And as such, she's getting like the parenting's a little bit looser. I'd clarify. I'm not totally sure if she's younger or older based on this. So I just want to be clear. Further, I would probably tie this into the parenting diversity statement and the fact that your mother is Haitian and kind of like maybe how this also expanded in other family dynamics. But okay, sure. I was always so enthralled with shows like this growing up, and my interest only increased once I began watching them for the sole purpose of figuring out what real law was and what was a TV trope. Yeah, I don't want to be seeing you watching Law and Order, and like that's why you want to go to law school. I'd probably cut that. This change was a result of a domestic violence class I took at Redacted University. It is not every day you know someone who makes national news in a murder case, but I did, and her name was Redacted. I'm going to redact it because you can probably figure out what university it is if I don't. She was a victim of domestic violence. It's someone you guys would know, though. Like you would recognize this name. She was a victim of domestic violence, and I'm drawn to a higher level of law because of her. So once again, I want to focus more on you kicking ass, which you did a good job of. You were talking about that story. Well, it's not the story that I might have picked in terms of the standing for the pledge. It's a good story of you being active. So I really like it on that sense. It's a little bit more high risk in terms of some people like it, others will not, but it was being active. And so like that was probably the best part of your statement, even though it's a little bit high risk. They continue. I've seen firsthand how our criminal justice system fails to protect the vulnerable, and I refuse to accept a reality where the best we can do for people is after they have passed. I want to engage in budget reforms that would allow mental health specialists to respond to police officers. Yeah, I focus less on what you plan to do. It's not that it's bad. Like, I think all this is fine. It's rather that it's not terribly powerful. What's powerful is what you've done. Anyone can say what they want to do. Like, literally anyone can say that, which not the how you knew this person or how you had this connection via your university, but rather like what you want to do to like change things. Like, I want to make the police officers have a better system by having mental health specialists. Like, anyone can say that, which kind of just devalues how powerful it is, because you're like, okay, if anyone can say that, it doesn't really belong in your statement. We want it to be about you and what you specifically bring. They continue though. I want to see a change in this world that not only makes a difference, but also makes sense. As a lawyer, you become an expert in your area of law, and people seek your services because of it. It is my goal to be a part of a community that values lived experiences and uses that as leverage to shape expertise. So like all of which is fine. I would just go a little bit more specific. I will kind of cut the final one just because I do have to end real quick. But the final paragraph is about a TV show and the foster care syndrome system. It feels like there's a lot going on here. The other thing is I don't see a ton of actual involvement that you had. Not that there's anything wrong with this, but without the personal experience, it's a little bit harder to make the argument that like you're super involved. So I would focus more on what you've done. If you want some like more ideas as far as what to write about, in the diversity statement, I would talk about your mother's parenting as a Haitian mom and kind of the split between maybe how she parented you different versus your sister, as well as the restriction. And that way you can kind of talk about advocating for yourself. For your personal statement, you could do the story of standing up for the pledge. I'd want to pick something more recent, honestly, because I don't love high school. And then also I don't love the fact that it is, a little bit controversial, but it is active. Like it's just high risk, high reward, and it's high school, which doesn't tend to help. But overall, like there's a lot of good pieces here. I definitely rework a lot of it just because there's a lot to do. But this is like fairly, normal as to what personal statements look like. Most of them, I'd say, need a bit of love. But the good news is that there is a lot of time to continue working on it. So if you have any questions for the person that submitted that, I'm most happy to chat, go further in, and hopefully that was helpful. If you enjoyed what we talked about today or learned something new, please leave a review or a rating. It really does help us out and helps us reach more people. If you have a question or anything you want talked about in the world of LSAT or law school admissions, you can always email support@HeyFutureLawyer.com to get it in the podcast agenda. Just put podcast in the subject and we will talk about it on the show. Alrighty, that's all we have for today. So I will see you all next time.